Welcome to AI Speed, the show where AI-powered companies talk about what actually works in the market right now. Business doesn't move at internet speed anymore. It moves at AI speed. And the people who figure it out, how to turn models into money, will own the next decade. I'm Evan J. Cholfin, founder of Luxhammer and growth partner to high-performing brands. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Runik Mehrotra, co-founder of Vise. Runik is building one of the leading AI-driven platforms in wealth management, helping financial advisors deliver personalized portfolios at scale through automation, data, and intelligent systems. His work is helping redefine how investment decisions are made and delivered in evolving financial landscape. Runik, thank you for being here.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
So you started building companies very early and eventually focused on financial services. What was that pivotal insight that led you to Vise?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's very few industries that are kind of like absolutely massive in scale and size, like where there's like, multiple $100 billion companies that exist that like are going to be transformed. They'll look incredibly different 10 years from now than they do today. And I think that with AI, I think more industries fit the bill. But when we started the business 10 years ago, financial services and namely wealth management was an example of one where there was not a lot of amazing technology. It was mostly people kind of delivering investment advice somewhat manually. And so we thought, okay, like how do we like modernize this? How do we create a way better experience for the advisor and for their end client? And I think core to that thesis was, and I think AI is an interesting accelerant to this, but core to that thesis was that each person deserves a hyper-personalized portfolio tailored to their needs. So today, the average person gets kind of a model portfolio. And so this is a portfolio of a bunch of mutual funds and ETFs that a advisor or investment professional has done some research on, and they create generally like 5 models. They'll create a moderate portfolio, an aggressive portfolio, a conservative portfolio, and then kind of 2 in between. And so those portfolios are fairly generic in nature. And then they'll say, oh, you look like a moderate investor. You've got, you're maybe retiring in 20 years, so you'll be a moderate investor. Oh, you're aggressive because you just started, investing and you have your whole life ahead of you from a time horizon perspective. And everyone kind of gets put into those same model portfolios. Ultimately, we believe that like each client is unique in nature. They have outside investments, they have beliefs, taxes, potentially estate, other things that make them unique in who they are, investments and things that they like. They want and deserve portfolios that are tailored around their needs, right? The ultra wealthy get kind of this concept of a family office where you hire a bunch of people and they deliver you a personalized kind of outcome based on all the things that are going on in your life. But the average kind of person gets these like very generic kind of portfolio templates, not necessarily something that's hyper customized to them. So we started Vise as kind of like, how do we deliver that hyper customization at scale? And our view is kind of that will be true across industries with AI. Like people are going to expect a hyper personalized outcome tailored to them as the cost of intelligence drops down to 0 over time.
Yeah, that's true, very true. So who do you serve best? What's the ideal advisor or firm profile that gets the most value from Vise?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say today we serve kind of large independent wealth management firms the best. So these are kind of what we call enterprise firms. They're the next generation of wealth management firms. So in the industry, you generally have kind of the institutional firms that have been around for a long time. Think of Merrill Lynch and Morgan Stanley and Wells Fargo. And again, I don't mean to knock those firms, but they've been around a long time. And so in some sense, they're saddled by the legacy technology and capabilities that they kind of already have. You then have these next generation of firms. These are folks like Wealth Enhancement or Creative Planning or Corient. if any of the listeners have heard of them. They're the next generation of these of these wealth management institutional firms. We service those kind of next gen firms. There's about $1 trillion of assets in next gen. We think that's going to kind of 10 trillion of assets across all of these different kind of firm types. And these enterprise RAs are kind of our core segment. So we focus a lot on how do we build them the operating system powered by AI to deliver their clients deeply customized investment advice at scale.
Yeah. And what would you say has been your biggest challenge growing Vise this past year?
I mean, I think the biggest challenge is how quickly things are changing, right? I think that naturally you build and assume things are static, whether it's in engineering or in your business functions. And so you kind of have to build systems and infrastructure. And the process of building that system and infrastructure oftentimes takes weeks, if not months. So on the technical side, you'd say, oh, these agents are really interesting, but these kind of coding agents are really interesting, but maybe not necessarily experienced enough to be able to ship code themselves. And so you build a lot of infrastructure around how you prompt them to be able to ship code, manual human review, the processes. 3 months later, actually, the harness has evolved and these agents are actually quite good and they can ship code themselves. Okay, now you have to rebuild all that infrastructure. So you tear all the existing stuff down and you kind of have to rebuild it from there. And then you find out 3 months from now, oh, wow, like the models actually can test themselves and improve themselves. So all this investment that I've done on this like kind of benchmarking and testing framework is no longer necessary. But then there are other problems that form. Okay, like now these models need environments that they need to be able to operate inside of. How do you build them their own environments? How do you kind of separate the code that AI writes versus the code that people write in your deployment pipelines? And so from a technical perspective, like everything's constantly changing. And so all the infrastructure you build, all the things that you're doing, you have to constantly think about what that will look like. And you have to make bets on where you believe the models and capabilities will go, because the amount of time it takes to build the scaffolding and infrastructure around the models is roughly the same amount of time it takes for the models to evolve and kind of stepwise change. And so I think whether it's like Claude Mythos coming out or any of the next gen, Meta launched a new capability of models today. And so, whether it's, Meta's new models or Claude's new Anthropic's new models or OpenAI's new models, those additional models kind of enable new capabilities that, could either subsume your infrastructure or require brand new infrastructure you haven't built. On the non-technical side, it's mostly education. Like the models are just getting so much better, so much faster, that I think we're finding that like each month we have to re-educate everybody in our organization how to best use them, how to use, kind of the new generation of harness like Claude Cowork, where you're interacting with files and generating content and having kind of this mini, somewhat neutered coding agent that generates that information. How you interact with Vize's kind of databases and, to get data yourself, how you interact with existing agents, building agents to kind of operationalize current workflows. All of those things are like changing every 3 months. And so, and as the models change on the technical side, they enable a bunch of new non-technical things also. And so we spent a lot of time kind of building a training infrastructure. We call it Vise Accelerate. We have someone, his name is David. He runs Vise Accelerate, and the job of Vise Accelerate is really just to internally transform the organization. And on the technical side, it's how do we think about the infrastructure that supports that, and on the non-technical side, it's literally training the people every day to get better at using AI.
Yeah. It's amazing just the turnover, how fast things are moving with AI and just keeping up with it. Every 3 months or so, you're seeing just these rapid changes, and keeping up with that is certainly a challenge. I'm curious what challenges you face raising awareness about your company and its products.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think that awareness is an important component. I think one of the things that we were just talking about this the other day. I think there's two kind of components that I think are really interesting. The first component, or one side of the coin, is how do you use AI to get awareness, right? How does marketing transform with AI? And then two, as the pace of shipping things improve, today, like the pace of how quickly you ship is the limiting regent to get your customers to understand the work that you're doing, not how quickly you can actually talk to them about that work. And so I'll give you an example. Like if you're the average technology company, you ship maybe 3 or 4 really big things that year. So your marketing team has enough time to basically educate your customer base on the 3 or 4 things that are coming. They have 3 months for each thing. But if that accelerates from 3 or 4 big things that year to like 8 or 9 big things that year, now you don't really have all of the time to explain to your team, here are all the things that are going on in your customers. And so this process of how do you give customers awareness of all the things that you're shipping, that's like the limiting region for us. Like the blocker is like, how do we do that well? And I think today we've thought a lot about what does marketing look like? How do you build automated pipelines that educate customers on, the capabilities that we have available? And some of the answer is like, maybe you give up. Maybe you like trust that the agent for that customer is going to have the most relevant information. So we work with a handful of firms that have deployed Anthropic and they have Claude kind of on their desktops. And instead of saying, hey, I want my, each of the people using our product to know exactly what features are up to date, we've thought about, well, okay, can we ship updates to our model context protocol? Or can we ship updates, to the site where if someone reads the site, an agent reads the site, they get the context so that the agent knows what new capabilities are available and can educate, the advisor. And then the other one is like good old fashioned email. Like we've automated emailing each advisor personally explaining the new feature we've launched and why it's relevant. And you can automate that whole pipeline. So instead of people having to do that, that process is automated. It feels customized. It's tailored to each person, tailored to the feature they're working on, and tailored to what we know about that customer and why they would use that feature in a relevant way. But you have to kind of rebuild all of the pipelines and awareness processes to kind of match the time horizon of improvements on the business side.
Yeah, definitely. And so, what are your main growth targets for this year for Vise, both in terms of adoption and platform expansion?
Yeah, I mean, so we have 80 billion of assets that run through our platform today. The goal is to grow that to 200 billion this year. And then we also have AI powered asset management strategies that we run. We have just under 8 billion in those strategies. We want to grow that to 20 billion this year. So those are kind of the numbers. But I think the numbers are only as useful as the story, right? And the goal of the story is, how do you enable more customization for clients across all different types of assets? And so today, the average client kind of only has mutual funds and ETFs in their portfolio. They don't really get to buy individual names or investments because the advisor doesn't have time to buy those things themselves. I can't do that alongside mutual funds and ETFs, whether I want to run direct indexing or an individual kind of actively managed SMA strategy, separately managed account strategy. If I want to invest in private markets, if I want to invest in KKR, Apollo, Blackstone, that's pretty difficult to do all in one account in a way that scales in a mass affluent manner. And so I think the way we get to those numbers is by enabling kind of what we call the whole portfolio solution, one singular platform that lets you kind of construct portfolios of all different types of assets, whether that's, public market assets, private assets, ETFs, mutual funds, individual securities, all in one singular account.
Yeah, definitely. Well, along those lines, what trends are you seeing in AI and wealth management that excite you most?
Yeah, great question. I would say that the biggest trends that we're seeing in AI is like, I mean, AI is a broad term, right? So the question is like, what parts? But I think the biggest trend that we see today is what we call kind of like, I would say it's the new generation or new version of Moore's law, which is if you plot the amount of time it takes to do a task, a critical task, and the AI's ability to take on that task. So you think about a simple task, maybe takes a minute. A complex task maybe takes 3 minutes. A really hard task maybe takes a couple of hours. It's interesting because Moore's law is this concept of every year, roughly, the amount of transistors on a chip doubles. And so the amount of chip capability kind of goes up and up and up and up in a meaningful way. And so if I'm a kind of like a someone thinking about computing, every 2 years, I have a much more powerful chip. Sorry, I think it's every 2 years, maybe not every year. I think what's happening is the quality of tasks that you can do is changing every 3 months. We actually think the size of tasks doubles every 3 months. And so, the AI model can can fundamentally kind of take on a much more sophisticated task now than it could 3 months ago. And then, in 3 months, it will take on an even more sophisticated task and an even more sophisticated task. And with the advent of these kind of long running agents, which are agents that work on the same problem for a really long time, our view is that it's likely that an agent can fully solve a task that would take a human 1 month end to end to do that they can't do. We think that's going to happen in the next maybe 3 to 6 months. And then it might be that an agent can do something that would take a person 1 year to do, that they can kind of do end to end without any sort of kind of interference. And so I think what's just going to happen is the complexity of work that AI can take on will go up and up and up and up in a really big way. And I think that will mean that people, to be successful as the world grows, is like, will need to up level their capabilities to be able to do more and more sophisticated things. Because if agents are doing more sophisticated things, then in some sense people have to be one step ahead. They have to do the like next higher level thing. Which means that like people just have to grow really fast. If these agents are growing really fast, can people learn as quickly as the agents can? And I think that's probably my biggest fear. I'm not sure. Like, I think that it will be really hard. The pace of evolution of the learning curve that is going to be expected by our team and by people is going to be really, really steep.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So if we were to have this conversation again in 12 months, what would you need to happen for you to feel like it's a big win?
Yeah, I think for our company, I think what win looks like is, is really how do you enable personalization at scale? Like, we want to be able to enable a hyper personalized experience for each of our end clients. So we have 30,000 different clients today. We want to grow that to 100,000 or 200,000 clients. And so I think that there's two dimensions of that. How many people can we deliver personalization for? And two, what's the depth of the personalization we can deliver? Like, how can you kind of democratize what would have been available to ultra high net worth or really sophisticated investors down to kind of like the average person?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, very cool. Well, that's it for today's episode of AI Speed. A huge thank you to Runik for sharing his invaluable insights into how Vise is helping financial advisors deliver personalized portfolios at scale and for navigating the future of AI powered investing. If you're building or leading an AI native company or a service business that uses AI under the hood and you care about revenue adoption and market share, make sure to subscribe to AI Speed. Learn how the best AI operators ship faster, sell smarter, and stay ahead. Thanks for listening. Until next time, keep building, keep selling, and keep moving at AI Speed.